Hmm. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 29th episode of iDebates. I'm the moderator for tonight's debate unit. The motion is transgenderism damaging to society? Arguing in the affirmative is Mighty Part. Arguing in the negative is Bubonic and Amber. Sorry. The debate format starts with each participant getting 5-minute opening arguments, 20-minute, like a 20-minute open dialogue, for which they concede any time from anything else too, and about 5-minute closing arguments. There will be a half-hour questionnaire right after for those listening in VC to directly ask questions to individual debaters if they're curious. And that will conclude the event, and any further discussion will not be included in the recording. The rules for the debate are simple. It is my role as moderator to keep civility in the topic at hand. Direct insults, excessive profanity, talking over one another is not allowed. Neither is any sort of major fallacy, although I will allow certain as long as they aren't too bad, for the sake of time. I will let you know when you are running out of time for each section, and if you continue, you'll be muted. As for the audience members, please use the formal debate text chat in the server to discuss the topic amongst yourselves. Fact check the debaters and prepare questions for the Q&A. If everyone agrees to these guidelines, Mighty Part, since you are arguing the affirmative, you may start whenever you're ready.
Okay. So I'll start off by saying this. People who have gender dysphoria are encouraged by our modern political climate to transition. This can be dangerous, especially towards young children. Most of the leading LGBT non-profits have openly said things such as, "Trans children do not have surgery." This quote was from a blog post made by Stonewall. Although it's uncommon for children to undergo a gender-affirming surgery, sadly it still happens. And these LGBT non-profits saying otherwise is a blatant lie to try and cover up the dark side of transitioning. I'm not going to say that every transgender person or trans activist is an evil bigot, as that's far from the case. I would hope and believe that most people wouldn't want a vulnerable child, who, by the way, cannot own a firearm or cannot buy alcoholic beverages or consent to intimate acts, to undergo a permanent body-altering surgery, and that they will have to live with for the rest of their life. Should I continue? Or is that enough?
That's enough. I'll have you cede the rest of your time to the open dialogue.
Yeah, that's my main argument. Now out of the way.
Amber, you may start your opening statement whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amber. It is my pleasure to argue that transgenderism is not a danger, nor is it damaging to society. It is entirely understandable that one could come to the conclusion that transgender ideology and the differing ideas of gender expression that are tied with it pose a danger to modern society. At a glance, it may appear that this is a new and radical position, that the idea of gender and sex being different, the idea that a person could change their body to adapt to a gender other than what is assigned by sex at birth. However, it is my position that not only is this a long-standing trend in human society across several ages and societies, but that the acceptance and wider exploration of alternate gender identity and expression comes at a net gain to society at large. There have been several historic examples of transgender individuals being part of a separate caste or class in society that functions in line with the larger whole. These societies, I hope, can provide evidence to you that not only is this not a new idea, but a functional one as well. In the current society, take North America, for example, transgender individuals are at a larger risk for various mental illnesses, violence and harassment, suicidal tendencies, healthcare discrimination. This is due in part to the social exclusion faced by them as a minority group, which in turn increases the likelihood of poverty, underperformance, and overall lower quality of life. We can prevent this exclusion with greater education and acceptance towards transgender individuals and adjacents, and it is study proven that social support and treatment can vastly improve the mental health of these individuals, which increases the likelihood that they will be able to perform better and gain a higher quality of life for themselves. This is to say that a greater number of accepted and more functional members that are no longer being excluded would be able to benefit society at a much greater level than would be possible were they to remain excluded or barred access from treatment. outside of strictly transgender individuals and their acceptance, adjacent individuals with non-standard gender expression being accepted, in turn, greater freedom of expression for all individuals being accepted would also be beneficial to society. This would mean a greater number of people having freedom to explore their identity without fear or repression, which can provide a more refined sense of self and provide a greater sense of confidence to the individual. This works in my mind in favor of the idea that not only is transgenderism not a damage to society, but it can provide a benefit as well. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess you'll see the rest of your time to the open dialogue, yeah?
Correct.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Should I start speaking?
1 second. All right,
No.
now we're gonna go to the open dialogue. You guys have 26 minutes and 10 seconds. You're basically just gonna be able to argue with each other, you know, in the open format. If it gets out of hand, I will have to step in. So just keep that in mind. You guys can start now.
All right. Do you have any points to tackle on my argument?
Yeah, I do. You kept on talking about acceptance. But it's like, it just seems a bit vague. You said that like accepting to trans people will like lead them to live a better life and that. Like, what do you mean by acceptance?
What I mean is acceptance. You don't have to have any great love. You can be quite apathetic. But to accept these individuals is to just let them live as they live, not to harass them, not to challenge them and ask them to prove their identity to a debate on whether or not they deserve to exist, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But it's like when like, but does like accepting them like go too far? Because it's fine like giving like not harassing them. Like I don't think you should harass anyone. But it's like when like you start to deny objective reality, like a trans man, for example, they are biologically male. Like no, that shouldn't be rubbed in their face all the time. That shouldn't be used to insult them. But like, if accepting them means like denying that they are biologically male or biologically female, then wouldn't that be more damaging? For example, if they need healthcare, there's some like differences in healthcare that like biological males and biological females can like receive, like due to the fact that there are biological differences. So like if a trans woman goes into a hospital and they say, yeah, I'm a woman, but like they don't say that they were born a man, then they could end up receiving like medical treatment that could be quite like dangerous to them.
Okay, yeah, no, I understand that. Firstly, there would be extensive medical records of hormones you've taken, surgeries you've undergone that would provide to them the information that they need. I'm sure there's questionnaires when you enter hospitals, and that is likely one of the questions on there, what you were born as well. It is a common, I think, misconception that no one is trying to argue that what your genetic markers when you're born, those cannot be changed. No one is trying to argue against that. What I think people are more trying to tackle is the idea that it doesn't matter necessarily what you started as, that you can become what is right for you. And there are non-standard when you're born, it isn't always simply being a male or female. There are outliers, there are intersex individuals, hermaphrodites, those born with one set of genitalia but the rest of their body not going in line with that. These things do happen. I think that greater education on the matter could be more helpful in showing everyone what goes into that, how it works, how it's not just a matter of wanting to be seen as something else other than you were born. It's a matter of you are born in the way that you are, and sometimes your body does not match your mentality.
You said about intersex people, but I feel like someone who is intersex is different who is someone who identifies as trans, because intersex is I would argue, is a biological condition, whereas
Correct.
being trans, I don't want to say mental condition because that can be interpreted as offensive. But you know what I mean? It's more of a mental. It's more like in your head, like a chemical thing in your head, being trans.
It can be. It wouldn't. It isn't necessarily widely understood what can cause an individual to be transgender, but in the case of intersex people often end up being identifying as transgender later in life due to when they're born, surgeries are made on them to make them one gender or the other on the doctor's preference or the parent's preference. And this is not a good practice. If transgender ideology was more accepted, these individuals would be able to actually choose for themselves how they're born and how they grow up and they develop as a person.
I feel like I completely agree with you. I feel like someone who's born intersex shouldn't have surgeries done to correct that, because like they're a child. You can't like tell them, hey, like what gender are you? Because they're a baby. You can't like understand that.
Right.
But I also think that like more acceptance of trans ideology. I feel like it wouldn't be the only way to stop that. You could you just make it a law that intersex people, you shouldn't perform surgeries on them when they're born. Like I don't think it has anything to do with transgenderism, as I feel like they are very similar but very disconnected like conditions. Like someone who is trans, they were, for the like most part, being trans, you don't need to be intersex to be trans. But like to be intersex, like to have a surgery done on you, like to correct intersex, and then being trans after that, that's like that's to do with being intersex, if you understand.
I understand, but see, the problem is the surgeries are done on them for the convenience of everybody else because they don't want to accept that this child is going to be different, that this child doesn't fall in line with the rest of society, that their gender might be different than what they want. You wouldn't necessarily be able to pass anything in their favor without greater acceptance of everything as a whole. I do understand if I can tackle something from your opening argument.
Yeah, sure.
Except sometimes what looks like acceptance isn't good when children are coerced into undergoing treatment. There are children that are transgender, but there are some people who simply have a different gender expression, feminine men, masculine women, that are, as children, coerced into believing that they are a different gender, not just that their expression is different. And that can be extremely damaging because the process to detransition, especially from testosterone, is difficult and painful. But that's why the separation of like gender identity and expression is really important, because it doesn't matter necessarily what you want to wear, how you want to act, because that does not have any bound on who you are as a person. I think your argument of children being coerced is a fault of society not having enough understanding on the subject of gender expression, and they're actively harming the community by trying to funnel everyone into a neat little box of masculine or feminine.
Feel like I get what you're saying from, but I feel like for the most part, the people who are like perpetuating these ideas that children can like medically transition, I feel like it's mostly done by people who are trans or who are advocates of who are trans right activists. So I forgot what I was gonna say.
That's all right. Take your time.
So my room's just really warm right now, so I can't.
That's all right.
So yeah, I feel like it does have something to do with like the transgenderism, like because currently transgenderism, like the big non-profits, are not doing anything to tackle like the bad bits about the like trans ideology. You get what I'm saying? Like they're not doing anything
I
to
understand
prevent
that,
it.
yeah,
They're not doing
because
anything. Sorry, you were
the
saying.
community as a whole is not one unified thing. It's very disjointed. There's many different ideas. Some people think you need dysphoria to be transgender. Some people say you can without it. There's a lot of differing ideas. And so some of them are more damaging. Some ideas want to reinforce gender stereotypes, which is what leads to children being coerced. I believe that if it was more generally okay, that the community could be more cohesive around a single idea. If more people were to be accepting, you could spread these ideas and make sure that the ones that are most beneficial for everybody come out on top rather than having to remain in a smaller community with fragmented and unhelpful ideas.
Also, I also feel that like the like non-profit like trans organizations aren't doing enough like to tackle the bad parts about it, such as like obviously that shouldn't be like a priority because it doesn't happen a lot, but they should these organizations are just flat out denying that it happens, like when they should be doing more to prevent it from happening. I feel like if you're a trans organization, you have a
Hey,
duty to
Mighty Part, Mighty Part
yeah.
and Amber, for the health of the debate, I'd like you guys to start proving your statements. Like when you say X is doing this or X is not doing this, I'd like you guys to give some kind of like more specific evidence for what you're saying.
Okay.
There's an organisation in the UK called Stonewall, and they made a blog post. Let me get the link. I'm gonna put the link in chat because proof. They basically said, if I click on the link, it said, let me just find the bit on the blog post. It said, it says, is in document is a blog post about a documentary made by the BBC, and it said the snippets and synopsis released by the BBC suggest that the programme queries whether trans children should have gender reassignment surgery. If this is so, then this is a journalistic inquiry. It's a trade in mistruths and moral panic. To be clear, trans children do not have surgery. The last part there is quite significant. They're flat out denying that trans children do have surgery. They're saying it's not true when there is evidence to support that some children are coerced into having these surgeries.
Okay. Well, I would agree that it's absolutely abhorrent that they're lying about it and that they're coercing, children into doing what they want. But I don't feel that this reflects the community as a whole. It reflects individual people with agendas that they want spread. I could argue that people are doing this that don't actively, they say they support the community, but they don't. Perhaps they want to give it a bad light at the cost of these children to bring down the community as a whole? I don't have a source for that.
I feel like the trans community should acknowledge the good and the bad about their community. They should call out the bad actors, and if they don't do that, then it kind of puts distrust, and it damages transgenderism as a concept. I feel like right now, like transgenderism, there is like some damaging parts about it, but I feel like society needs to work on making sure that these damaging things don't happen.
I do agree society would need to be very cognizant and very strict on what happens to especially minority groups. However, in your argument that they're lying about reassignment surgery, it is legally required that you be 18 to undergo gender reassignment surgery. Is that not correct in Britain?
That is correct. In Britain, you're not allowed to have them until you're 18, but in other countries, it may not be the case. Like they could have said, if they said in the UK, children need to be 18 to transition medically, then I'd have no problem. It's just the fact when
hold on. This is a UK. This is a British advocacy group. Let's not move the goalpost here. You can't move it from this British advocacy group now needs to be advocating on behalf of the entire world. No, we're not doing that. Stay on topic, or not stay on topic. Stay within a reasonable scope. Don't demand that much out of her.
I'm aware in North America as well, the US, and I believe Canada, I wouldn't know, but it is a requirement to be 18 here to have reassignment surgery. You can be put on puberty blockers as a minor with your parents' signature. You have to go through a therapist giving you a note of recommendation, but until you're of age, I don't think you can have more than puberty blockers. I could be wrong, but I will fact check myself. If you just give me a moment. The earliest you can get any sort of gender affirming care is 16, and that's with parental consent, which, as it stands, is not a reality for many children, even with people who accept the community. Most are not willing to let their children do these things, at least in North America. Having access to this care isn't necessarily letting you undergo these treatments. It's not easy to get recommendation via a therapist for these things in the first place. There is informed care in the US and some countries that makes it a lot easier, but especially for children, although it does happen, and negative effects on these children are a fault of the parents being uninformed and a bit too eager. But overall, it isn't easy for children to fall into this on their own. It comes from outside bad actors.
In Matt Walsh's latest documentary, he was talking to these people, and there was this woman, this disgusting woman, or two of them actually. One of them said that she gives children hormones, like 10-year-old children hormones, because a child says that they're a boy when they're a girl, or they say that they're a girl when they're biologically a boy. 10-year-old children is too young to get this stuff, and even though there's a law there, it's obviously not enforced if this stuff is happening. There was this other woman in the documentary who openly admitted and was proud to admit that she performed top surgery on a 15-year-old.
I can agree with you. That is a horrible practice, and you should go through a process to ensure that these children are as they say they are. They should maybe grow up a little bit before that. I don't think a couple people on a radical side of a community should be used as an argument against the whole. Sometimes communities have members that are as radical as such because of the social and political climate that they face. I think if the waters were more even, so to speak, if you could have a discussion on the subject without condemning one side or the other, then the community would be more ready to act on all of this, and people wouldn't be doing this to children just to support the community, to support the idea.
I see what you mean. But were you implying that things shouldn't be challenged?
No, they absolutely
No.
should be. Damaging practices should be condemned. These children shouldn't be forced to go through these things because someone decided that they should not be challenged. I'm saying it comes from the opposition being so fervent that within the community you decide to be just as radical in the positive, if you understand.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. And honestly, the only reason I think transgenderism, for the most part, is damaging is because of the trans community not doing enough to protect kids. Just because they've had been in service, and these 14-year-olds have been saying that kids should be able to transition. It's for a 14-year-old to say that is a bit worrying. Where
Well,
did this child learn that from?
there's only so much that legislation and laws can do against it. It's terrible to happen, but if people aren't being held accountable for this isn't a fault of the community necessarily. It's the fault of the people not enforcing their own laws. It's a part of their own apathy allowing the community to destroy itself. The community shouldn't be doing it in the first place, but if these things are knowingly going on, they should be stopped, not pointed at as an accusation to defame the whole community. It should be dealt with.
Well, I feel the trans community has has the moral responsibility to make sure that these to be they have a moral responsibility to be against it and to be openly against it.
I
Because
believe if you, sorry to talk over you, I believe if you ask any member of the community that you walk up on in the street, I think they would agree. I would agree, very much so, that doing this to children isn't okay. That you don't simply give hormones to a child that says once that they're one thing or the other. You talk about it with them, you listen to them, and you go down the proper lanes. But I think you're misrepresenting the community. Not a single person that I am aware of, and that's anecdotal, but the community is not in favor of harming children this way. We want the safest and the best treatment for our most vulnerable members of this community. I think that that's part of why we need greater education on the topic, so that this doesn't happen, so that people understand that what they're doing is wrong, and that so they don't do it, and that they're held accountable for it.
I see where you're coming from. I have nothing more to say on this argument specifically. So
Okay.
if you have anything else to say.
I wouldn't have anything else. No. I
Uh,
guess that's it.
is that it?
Uh, if he has nothing further to argue, I can very well sit and talk about it. I suppose that's it.
Well, we had about 2 minutes left anyways. So, all right, questionnaire time.
We'll have no closing statement.
Oh, yeah, closing statements. Wait, do we even do closing statements anymore? I think we do. All right.
Yes, we do.
Mighty
Sorry.
part then.
Mighty Part, you can do your closing statement first. And go.
I didn't really think we needed to do a closing statement.
You can just not do a closing statement.
Yeah, I'll just not do one. There's
What
not
about you,
many.
Amber? You want to do a closing statement?
Yeah, I'll put a nice bow on it.
All right, go
There
ahead.
is definitely negative practices, and there are contentions within the group. It's not a solid thing, and sometimes it's not a pleasant thing. But I think that comes from the position that they're put in. That it is not excusable, but I think this happens because of how resisted they are in some communities, and that with a greater acceptance, the community can be more open, and that the people who do this can be, held accountable, and that will happen less over time. I still believe as a whole that there's a lot of work to be done for accepting and education on the matter. That is all. Thank you.
Alrighty. Well, now we're going to go to the half-hour questionnaire. If there's anybody who has any questions, now would be your time to ask them. Remember, you'll be asking them to individual debaters, not both debaters, usually, although you can ask both debaters a question, I believe. Just the focus is on individual debaters. Ask about their stances and stuff. And I'll start the timer now. Anybody have a question? I think you're supposed to type them in the live debate chat. If you don't want to ask them yourself, I can ask the debaters the question for you. Just type in the live debate chat. Remember, you aren't here to argue with the debaters. You're asking a question, so just ask the question and that'll be it. We'll wait a little bit, and if nobody has a question, that'll be it.
No.
Afterwards, Mighty Part, I would like to talk with you a little bit.
Okay.
Welcome everyone joining late. You missed the party.
I missed the embarrassing. Damn. No questions.
Any questions at all relating to the topic?
What a lovely and engaged audience we have.
Even I got home with
Isn't
the
it
last
splendid?
one.
Okay, Kimono has a
Kimono,
question.
hey, me! Kimono
Settle
asked-
down.
Amber, what are your thoughts on children going through this?
Can you clarify going through gender dysphoria, or do you mean specifically going through this process of like they're not ready for treatment yet and they're being given it? So I think that children don't always immediately know who they are, who they want to be. They're very young and impressionable. And for a parent to act on that is really, really bad, because you'll grow up and you'll grow into whichever identity you were supposed to be. And it's highly likely, if you went into that as a child, that you'll realize as an adult that it isn't actually what you want. And then you'll have to go through another process of detransitioning, which is a really terrible process, especially if you've had sexual reassignment surgery. It's a really horrible thing, and I would not wish it on anybody. Not only will you grow up being discriminated against, but you'll have to face that the rest of your life because your parent made choice for you just because you said one or two things. It's disgusting. It was a good question. Thank you.
Any more questions?
I have a question for both of the
You can
participants.
type.
Okay.
I'm kidding. You can go.
What are both of your thoughts on the belief that some individuals will transition, quote unquote, or just falsely transition, cross-dress, whatever, to gain benefits in society or to avoid consequence for certain acts?
As it stands, that is a hilariously laughable idea. I'm sure maybe you could pull it off in some small communities here in the States, but the idea that you can be benefited by being transgender is just hilarious. You might get clout on social media for it, but at the cost of having your house spray painted, that sort of thing. It's not that doesn't strike me as a serious idea. It would
Chris, is that for all debaters or just one or two? Okay. I'm assuming that your question was answered, Raven.
Yeah.
not by mighty part if he could.
What was your question again? I never heard it the first time.
Oh, I asked, what are your thoughts on certain individual on the belief that certain individuals may transition, quote unquote, or cross dress to gain some social benefit or to avoid consequence for certain actions?
Well, I think that is a stupid thing to do if they're just doing it for that. And it also harms the trans community as well. I think if they're doing it to avoid consequences or just for some personal gain, then it's just it is a very silly thing to do.
Okay. Does anybody
All right.
else?
Chris had a question.
Chris had a question for both debaters. Amber, I'll ask you first. How should prisoners be sorted if they claim to be trans?
That would depend on the strength of their claim. If they just get arrested and say that they are trans and have no history of it, I suppose you could give them the benefit of the doubt and take them to a psychologist, a therapist, and ensure that first. If there's no prior history of this, though, I reckon that they should not be sorted. They should not necessarily be trusted on that. But if they are actually a proven transgender individual, there's no question that they should be sorted into the gender that they now identify as. You can't necessarily
Alrighty.
take their word for it, but yeah.
What about you, Mighty Part? You gotta answer that question.
Still muted or not? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Oh yeah, just the green bubble wasn't appearing on my name. Anyways, yeah, for the most part, I agree with Amber. But I do feel that like trans women should go to a men's prison if they're arrested. Because there have been cases of trans women doing very inappropriate stuff to the other women inmates.
If I may interject real quick, sexual assault in prisons is horrific, but it happens in both male and female prisons to huge extents. And if you think trans women wouldn't do equally as bad as being those who are victimized in a male-dominated prison, you're insane.
unit I would like to add. This is between Amber and Mighty Part.
I could say a similar thing. The idea to bar, well, trusted or good individuals, as good as you can be, being in prison, to bar them from their own community on the basis that some people are going to do horrific things, I think that's a terrible idea, because that would put people who have gone through no hormones, no surgery, in the same place as a full woman who's been on hormones her entire life with surgeries undergone, to put her in a male prison system that will be absolutely horrific for her, not to mention the sexual assault that can be done upon her by the male inmates. Not to speak of the discrimination she'd face in there as well. I think that's a horrible idea.
Honestly, prison is like a very dangerous place for anyone to go.
Yeah.
And I feel like trans individuals as a whole should have more, like, there should be protections in place because they'd be obviously their target. But it's just that, it's like, there's been so many cases like reported of specifically trans individuals assaulting women in women's prisons.
Can I
Like, I
interject?
don't know if it's to do with that. Is like that's what journalism wants. Is that
I would say that there, however many cases they're reporting on this, there are simply less transgender people. How many cases of sexual assault do you think they are not reporting, done by cisgender individuals and what have you? There are bound to be more, just on the basis of there's more of those people in there. I don't think it's fair to sort an entire community one way or the other because some are going to do this. Regardless of protections, there's only so much you can do, and you would be mistaken to believe that guards won't be apathetic, that guards will not, that guards in prisons will actually do their job and protect every individual that they might have personal disagreements with.
I see where you're coming.
That
I
is all.
also, expanding on what I said, I would like to correct what I said. I'd like to say that like maybe it should just be like trans women who have had like their male parts removed should be allowed in women's prison, because if they don't have like their male like part, then they can't do any like they obviously can't assault the
They
cis or anyone in
absolutely
there.
can still assault people. Yes.
I mean like sexually.
No, you're aware that lesbians exist, correct? It would be essentially like that.
Yeah, I'm aware of lesbians. Well, what I'm trying to say is like it's like rape is what I'm specifically trying to allude to.
The idea that trans women could not sexually assault someone on the basis of no longer having a penis is just not correct. You can still, women can sexually assault women. It's still equally as horrific.
Okay. So, Kimono had a question.
Okay.
Well, it looks like Sir Derpington asked his question first, so I'll ask. Sorry, Kimono.
Sir Derpington.
Sir Derp, I'm guessing this is to both debaters. Should military trans individuals be able to use socialized healthcare to receive a non-life-threatening surgery? I guess that's what he means. It's worded kind of weirdly.
So you're asking if a member of the armed forces should be able to have access to healthcare.
No, fuck the soldiers.
I don't think that if your healthcare is socialized and you don't generally, would this be assuming you don't generally have to pay for non-life-threatening things? If so, then they should receive equal treatment to what is the general practice. It shouldn't be any different.
Hello.
Okay.
Mighty Part, I'm guessing you should also answer the question.
Okay. So, obviously, I don't think people should be discriminated against. Like, they should get the healthcare that's right for them, like, biologically speaking.
Okay. Then I'll guess it'll be Kimono's question, which was to both debaters. What do you guys
Okay.
think of having gender-neutral bathrooms present in public schools?
Yes.
Yeah. There's no reason not to.
I feel like bathrooms in general should just be like a long line of like doors with toilets in them, like separate. You know what I mean, like a long line of like doors with toilets in them.
A bunch of stalls lined against each other.
Yeah. Like I feel like it would like the doors should be like go top to bottom, not like the gap in it. Just be completely enclosed. And this will
Yeah.
make people feel safe that they can use the bathroom. And it would also make like people who don't fit the gender binary, it would make them feel more included.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything more to say on this. I agree.
Before we move on to another audience member's question, I'd like to ask a question for both
Okay.
participants. While we were on the subject of sexual assault before, do either of you believe that there may be a prominent issue with child predators taking refuge in the trans community?
I haven't heard anything. I haven't looked into anything specifically on it, but I can definitely see that happening. You infiltrate a group that is vulnerable, that is small enough that it's not willing necessarily to push a bunch of people out. They're trying their best to be very accepting. These people could end up being the type to do harm upon their children, to influence young children to transition. I think it's definitely possible, as much as it is for any other group. Yeah.
I feel like children in general are like vulnerable to be manipulated by adults.
Yeah.
Just by the very nature that they're children.
Extremely. Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if there was like a big problem with it.
It's very, especially vulnerable children. I'm sure that people do try and prey on them. It's sad and disgusting, but yeah, I'm quite sure it happens.
Okay. Unit, if you'd like to continue with the regular question.
With the regular question? No, I don't see
I mean
anybody.
the audience. The audience.
The audience question.
No, I don't see any other questions. I mean, Derpington asked one, but I'm not asking that shit because of the way he worded it. That shit is way too biased.
Can you send it to me anyway?
Fuck it, I'll just ask it. He asked, should taxpayers pay for surgeries that are essentially cosmetic, making them non-deployable? I didn't ask it because it's a misunderstanding of a lot of fucking things.
Yeah, I don't even entirely understand what it means. As in,
It's a very obvious leading question. It's attempting to lead you to the idea that the surgery makes them entirely useless to the military. It's entirely cosmetic, entirely unnecessary. It's entirely elective, which is a complete misunderstanding of gender reassignment surgery and how the military fucking functions.
that is correct. Yeah, yeah, that's a bit of a silly question. It
It
does
doesn't
not
make
make anyone non-functional.
nor does it make them non-deployable. You know what? Somebody asked a real question. Awesome. I don't have to engage with that one. Chris asked, should trans people be sent to the front Or are... Oh, god damn it! Fuck, I have to answer it. Alright.
Go on.
Sorry, please allow me to answer this one.
One, no. You do not
No,
answer.
Unit, I can answer this one. It's fine.
Should trans people be sent to the front, or should they be relegated to rear guard duties in the army? Derpington, I will talk to that about later. I'll talk to you about that one.
It should be the same as literally any other member of the armed forces. If you have the strength, the capabilities, if you go through the training, you should go where you feel you would be best served. Transgender people are quite literally just people. It doesn't matter. You go where you think you're needed.
Yeah, about the question. I don't really understand how that's relevant to being trans. Because I feel like it's too... Like, like a trans person is just a person. Being trans doesn't make you inherently weaker or stronger than cis people.
I agree.
Like, people should be picked for the military based on their athletic and like skills and their endurance. Like, being trans should not have a part in being picked for the military or the army or whatever.
Chris did actually bring up a good point. Transgender people will need medications, but depending on the length of your employment, your deployment to other countries, it might be a non-issue. You can stock certain methods of taking hormone therapy is easy to bring with you. It doesn't necessarily expire. You can take injections that are like weekly. It would not be terribly difficult to have a supply.
Also, like other like conditions that people there's conditions that people have in the army and that they require medication for. For example, people who have allergies, they like carry an EpiPen with them. So I think this issue has probably been like tackled in the military already. Like it's not just
it wouldn't be any logistical issue, not necessarily, no.
Yeah.
All right. Kimono has asked 2 questions, one to both and one to Amber. For the both, should trans people compete in the Olympics? Is it unfair? Do they get an advantage from their biological sex? Keep in mind you have a little under 10 minutes left in the questionnaire.
Okay. It is to my understanding that specifically for trans women, that their hormone levels are regulated, as in if they are above or below a certain threshold, they are barred from participation. By the nature of how hormones work, when you're on them for a sufficient period of time, then by preparing for the Olympics, you're already undergoing a massive amount of time. I think it should be a non-issue.
Yeah, I would say the Olympics is a very regulated event, so they'll have the proper restrictions in place for anyone who doesn't meet, like, who has an advantage. And they check for levels and that, like Amber said.
Okay.
All right. To Amber, would you consider transgenderism a mental disability? Why or why not?
I wouldn't say mental disability. It is an affliction that definitely has a mental component to it. A disability would imply that you're lesser and less functional as a person. So definitely not disability, but it is definitely it's a physical condition that has an effect on your mentality, how you see things, but it's not a disability, no.
Any more questions? If there's not a current question, I do have another one.
Okay.
This one's for Amber.
Ooh.
Amber, would you say that dysphoria is a requirement for someone to begin the process of transitioning?
That is somewhat difficult, but my instinct is to say yes because there's many levels and layers to what can be called dysphoria. I think that if you don't have dysphoria, the entire point of transitioning your gender is because you do not like, you don't identify, you don't accept what you are born into. There has to be some disjointment between what you want and what you were born as for you to consider changing that. If you don't have dysphoria, if you don't have a reason, I don't understand why you should actively choose to do that. It doesn't make very much sense.
Would you believe that, or do you believe that there is a worrying, let's say, a trend of people, mostly young teenagers, uh, taking part in the trans community just for clout or attention-seeking issues?
I think that as of late, there have definitely been, not just in the trans community, but like various mental illnesses. There have been a bunch of young people on social media claiming to have this or that, identifying as various things. It is quite worrying and it's a little bit sad because most of these children are simply looking for attention and they want to be seen as something they're not, and they know that this is the way to do it. I think it is a bit worrying. It strikes me as a problem that parents aren't giving very much attention to their children, so they're seeking outlets for approval and attention from just various people on the internet, which is just a dangerous thing on its own. I don't think it's an issue for the communities necessarily. I think it's an issue of that children are just not being properly attended to or being raised, and it's going to have a real bad effect on their future.
Okay, interesting.
Probably the most reasonable response to that I've ever seen. Okay, looks like Juby has a question. Ask it. Not my fault. She was given like at least a minute to type that shit out.
It's going to be a hell of a
By the
question.
way, you guys got around 4 minutes left, so.
Okay, I'll make mine short.
What do you guys think about the Supreme Court thinking of looking into Obergefell v. Hodges and Lawrence versus Texas? What do you think is the future for trans folk that want to transition?
I'll need you to define that. I'm not adept. I can look it up though.
I believe Lawrence v. Texas was the landmark case that legalized gay marriage.
Oh. Oh, okay. So,
No. It was the one that ruled that sanctions of criminal punishment for those who commit sodomy are unconstitutional. And sex that doesn't create kids. Gay sex and sex that doesn't create kids, is what she said.
okay. That could directly have negative effects for transgender people. Yeah, because if you're transitioned and having surgery, obviously you're effectively infertile. You will not make kids. That's gives rise to the possibility to, yeah, arrest these people just for partaking in these activities. Yeah, that has large potential for very negative effects. That is not good.
Uh, Mighty. Actually, don't forget Mighty is British, so this is like a uniquely American thing.
Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna move on, Juby. Sorry, I'm gonna ask Krish his question. With the popularity of
Well,
red flag laws that are used to no-knock persons of interest, for firearms, usually with alleged mental issues or alleged fanatical leanings increasing among legislators. Could the government deem trans people as undesirables or unfit to own firearms? And what do you guys think about that if it does happen? And that'll be our last question because we've got 2 minutes left.
Yeah, that's actually really possible if they decide that it's a drastic mental illness or if it makes you erratic and irresponsible, then yeah, they could easily just disarm an entire minority group of access to firearms, which is a dangerous precedent.
Yeah, I think being trans on its own doesn't make you inherently more dangerous, like to own a firearm. Yeah, there are cases of being like kids, like for example, doing maybe dangerous and illegal things with firearms, such as taking them into school. And yeah, you know what I'm alluding to, but it's like I feel like being trans, you should still have a right to bear a firearm. Like it doesn't make you, being trans doesn't make you more stupid. It doesn't make you more likely to misuse a firearm. So honestly, I don't see any reason why that should be illegal.
If I may build on Chris's question there, a lot would argue
20 seconds
that
left.
it'll be real quick. A lot will argue that the transgender community would, be very prone to more mental illness, suicide, depression, all that. Would that not weigh in on the factor of disallowing trans individuals access to firearms?
That would, but given proper, if regulations were put into place to take mental tests and undergo training for safety of firearms, I believe that would make it a non-issue. Besides the point, when transgender individuals are given appropriate care and social acceptance, that drastically reduces the risk of various mental illnesses.
I see.
Well, that's time. That was our last question for the
All
debate.
right.
Thank you, everybody, for your attendance and for your very, very deep attention to the debate and to our debaters' questions. We're gonna move VCs now. At least I
Oh
assume
wait,
we are.
didn't you want to plug something?
Oh yeah. I have some friends, some very good Swedish friends. They're fostering a cat at the moment. Yet that cat needs some care, some dental care. Otherwise, it will die a very slow and painful death. And so they're just gonna have to put it down. Unfortunately, they can't afford it. It's not a super expensive surgery. It's only around 8,000 SEK or $800 approximately. So, if anybody would like to donate to the GoFundMe, I'm gonna put it in the live debate chat. It is important. It's very nice. That cat is otherwise very healthy. Otherwise, it will be, you know, rehomed into a loving household, and it'll have at least a couple years left in her, which is very nice. Very great cat. If you guys could donate to that, that'd be awesome. If you can't, it's fine.
We'll also post a link to it in the YouTube description.
Very nice.
Cats are awesome.
Cats are fantastic.
They're
Okay,
the
I
only
believe
animal